right, I'll get started. I'm Kuzniarek, Director of Document and Media Systems here at Wolfram. I've been doing this sort of stuff for a very long time. I have a lot of different mixed responsibilities, so you all might interact with me in a lot of different capacities, but the one I usually focus on here at our tech conference is CDF. I try to be the central source of what's going on in CDF. I don't know everything about the technology. I try to know most about it. I try to get things fixed if things are broken through all the different teams responsible for it. And I help set policy for the kinds of rules and licensing aspects that go along with it. I'd like to talk now about where we are with it and what's new, what's coming. So let's get started with that. I should say right off the bat that Mathematica 10 is of course out the door. You've all seen it, but it usually takes a little while for CDF Player to catch up. It's taking a little bit longer this time because we've got quite a large stack of things to work through with a lot of different projects. In the case of CDF Player, we are making a major change in how we put it out into the world. It used to be that we had two separate products that were called Player, Player Pro and CDF Player, separate from each other. Our plan now is to build them together, and Player Pro becomes an activation of CDF Player. So I think lots of people have been wanting that, so that's our direction going forward. Let me just reiterate what we did with version 9. We introduced Enterprise CDF. I think there's still always a lot of conversation to be had about that. I'm a good person to work with on it, but our salespeople also are the good entry point for that, and they bring questions to me. We improved our sandboxing in version 9, and of course carrying forward in version 10. HTML export in Mathematica for version 9 included embedded CDF, so that was a nice add-on there. We added a preview mode in version 9, so when you're developing content that you plan to put out as CDF, you can look at it in this file CDF preview choice here, whether you're looking at it for distribution as free CDF or enterprise CDF. It gives you a way to test what you're doing. We did a few little deployment wizard updates. We added send mail to enterprise CDF, and we extended input field support a little bit for enterprise CDF to include special functions, and added R-Link support for enterprise. Going forward with version 10, I think at the last conference I mentioned these things, and these are still the plan, so I'll go through them in a little more detail. And I can talk about the plugin issues in the context of Mathematica, which you all have, because the plugin is the same technology whether it's coming from Mathematica or coming from CDF Player. All right, so, but the first thing separate from the plugin is that we have this CDF deploy function, which a number of you have been using to do development, where if you are doing application development and you've put a lot of material together in a notebook, it's your IDE, right? It's your scripting environment, whatever you like it to be, and you are on a regular basis developing or deploying CDFs. You don't want to necessarily do that manually through the menu. We have this CDF deploy function for that purpose. And previously, it was a little unclear on how to pick up the enterprise licensing behaviors in version 10. That's what it defaults to. In other words, whatever your license level is what you get when you do CDF deploy. So I just wanted to make that point clear, and I'm sure that's very useful to a lot of you. Another feature of the plugin now, going back to that, that's new, is web scaling. So for years now, it's been an issue that you could not get your CDF to match when you magnified your window, but now that just works. The thing to be clear about with that is that to get that behavior, you do have to export your CDF with version 10. It's not the CDF Player and the plugin is not just going to magically pick that up for you. You have to go back to the CDFs you've deployed and run those through version 10 to get that. Another nice feature that's available in the 10 plugin is accessing parameters from the DOM. In other words, from the model that describes everything in the HTML to the browser. So the function for that is, or the feature, the way to access that is through this argument string plugin parameters to current value. And in your CDF that you deploy, you essentially can run a dynamic on that to get a constant result of the different parameters that might have been defined in the page, including other kinds of data. So anyway, to explain where those parameters are supposed to be coming from, I'm just showing here, and this I'll pass this information along with my talk. If you're just using the embed tag without using our JavaScript, it's just standard parameter settings. In the case of our JavaScript, it's an additional list that you add to where the embedded CDF is being called in the code. And let's see if any of these other ones are working. This one seems to be working fine. So the point here is that this box right here, the square box, is coming from a CDF. It's the same CDF, but every time I'm pushing these buttons here, I'm resetting the parameter value for what color to pull into it. And you're essentially using the method that you rewrite your HTML on the fly to pass those parameters through, because you're rewriting the setting of those parameters for the embed code for the CDF. It's pretty much the standard way these things are done, like when you run forms or anything else. In the case of this example, there's JavaScript that is being run to redefine that expression. The example I was having trouble with is more simple than that, and maybe I did something wrong when I set it up. So let me go to one of these other older examples I've had of that feature, this theme selector. So same thing here, that it's resetting the entire page by pulling in different pictures. It's not changing the CDF, it's just resetting parameters for the CDF, which change the color in this plot. Okay, let's jump forward. Another idea that has sort of come together this year, and that I think is worth discussing now because of the way that we build our products, is this notion of what I call a portable CDF layout. And the idea there is that if you're developing an application and you really don't like having your customer, let's say, or the person you're building it for have to download something to install, it's possible to give them an entire CDF application layout and have it just run on their system. And that's now true for Windows as well. That had been true in the past for our Macintosh builds, because Apple's applications are always generally self-contained. In the case of Windows, that's true now as well. So things like fonts and all the other DLLs for MathLink, et cetera, are all contained in the application directory. So it's possible to actually zip up, say, both a Windows and Mac version of CDF Player, which is what I've done here in this layout. And so when somebody unzips what you've given them, they could essentially just use this is a Java file I had written. It's a simple thing that looks for what platform you're on and opens the correct player and opens the first CDF in the list of files. So in this case, I have a directory of files, which are the Mac CDF player and the Windows CDF player, and a CDF file. This CDF file is just one simple one, but it could be the CDF file you want people to be exposed to first, and you could have a whole chain of CDF files in here and .m files and whatever else that support your application. And by double-clicking the jar file, it just starts up the appropriate player and starts up that CDF file that you want them to see when it first opens. Now, in the case, this is based on version 9, and one of the features that we're taking care of for version 10 is if you launch a CDF by double-clicking on it or dragging it to the app, it will repress the welcome screen. In this case, you'll see that it does give it that. So if this were now in version 10, what you would see open is just that CDF file. So this is the starting point for you to work with. Now, I do happen to have CDF Player, and I do happen to have Mathematica on my machine, but I have tested this on clean machines that have never had any of our products installed, and it does work. So it's something that you can check in on through our sales team or our support team, and I can help get that configured for people. I've even mapped out a little wizard for building this zip architecture that pulls the applications off of our Packlet server. So conceivably, you just walk through the wizard, push a few buttons, it builds it for you, go away, get some coffee, come back, and everything will be zipped up for you. Okay, and new details for our version 10 base CDF Player. Free CDF will support up to 4 cores, enterprise CDF up to 16 cores. It's been a bit buggy in the past. We will have input field copy and paste working cleanly. As I just mentioned, repressing the welcome screen when opening files directly, which I think is pretty important for people delivering applications. And then because we are building everything together as the same app, Pro and CDF Player, we're not, in fact, it's essentially Mathematica because we're not sweating the details about footprint. We used to, years back. It was sort of a concern. It's like, well, it's getting to be 300, 400 megabytes. We better sweat that. Nobody cares anymore. Really, if the thing is about that size or bigger, it's fine, and that's probably where it'll arrive at. And so that means connectivity for all the different types that we support will just be consistent everywhere. We shouldn't see any more problems with that. I want to talk about Cloud CDF. Because, as I mentioned, the issues of plug-in viability are a concern, and really the only appropriate way forward is to be working with cloud deployments. So I think cloud has been the message of this conference, and you've probably seen a lot of different demos of things. I just want to summarize more than anything of what's there and show them quickly. So in the case of working from your desktop, you can essentially deploy straight from there. So if you're putting together an interactive object and run cloud deploy on that object that you've defined, you end up with this URI that takes you straight to that object in the cloud. I thought maybe I was making that public. Again, you've probably seen a lot of people do this here at the conference and logging in. I'm not quite sure why I ended up having to do that. Right. So anyway, here's the CDF living in the cloud, and I think you saw Stephen demo that as well. It's pretty reasonable as an experience. It does, I think, what it should. Then you could just as well be creating that in your cloud account, and this is the same thing as if I were developing it right now here, with the code for it should be available. Well, there it is. So I can share from here if I choose to. And I'll just go through that quickly. So where did my, so essentially you can work through file access settings that we have in the cloud. So in this file tab here, and when you choose access, you can pick people to collaborate with. So you're putting emails in here, and they have access to this thing that you've developed. So in that way, this becomes a bridge. That what you put in the cloud is the bridge between you and your coworkers or collaborators. But other options include embedding it as an object on a server somewhere. So if you choose to deploy embeddable content, you're given a lot of choices to work with here. Not all of them are active. The CDF plugin one is still under development. But if we say embeddable web content, well, this one, Cloud CDF, yeah, right, that's probably the cleanest one to point out. You ask to generate the script, and you're given a code blob to copy and paste into your HTML. So let me just show that real fast. So I've done that with this HTML page. And this is the embedded object. I think we still have to do a little work with controlling margins. I didn't have much luck with that, but everything that's here is branded. Going forward in future, there will be methods to white label this, but it's the same object. It's on a separate server, and the code for that, oh, well, can't pull that file up, but it's straightforward enough that you could use Embed Code as well on your desktop to generate that. So, for example, you'd get a result like this, when you say Embed Code of cloud deploy of that object. And again, it's the same little code blob right here that supports what you just saw on that page. Yep.
When you embed the code in a website, you don't need a plugin.
Correct. And so that's, again, the main point of that is to get away from the issues of most modern browsers wanting to put a security interface on top of any plugin, or ultimately eliminating support for the Netscape plugin architecture, which is what our technology is based on, which most plugins are. Now, Google developed their Pepper plugin, which architecture, which has allowed Adobe to at least make Flash and PDF plugins work in Chrome going into the future, but most other companies are moving away from plugins. That said, the plugin will still give you speed and efficiency, so that's why we're working out the cloud option for making that another way to embed CDF from the work you do through the cloud. You could conceivably, use the plugin if it's available to the client side and get very fast interactivity. And if it isn't available, then it can go back to the cloud version. Okay, and so I'll talk real quickly about our plans for future. So you've been hearing about mobile. That is something we are still pushing hard on, and we are making, or we can make an SDK available for iPad, but it's not documented well, and it's one of those things where you really have to want it. We have to really want to give it to you, so it's a conversation. The CDF Player on iPad is still coming, but a Wolfram Cloud app for mobile devices is the thing we're focused on right now. And that is a good way to access a lot of your content. And it's essentially more portable because it's the kind of thing that we can easily put together for most all mobile devices. We're looking forward or ahead to a certificate-based security authorization system, so you don't have to see that little dynamics warning every time you are running something that is more than just a very simple manipulate. And it allows us to develop a public signing mechanism, so we can interact with you. If you need something to be secured through our certificate system, we set it up, and it just works for all of your customers that way, or all of your clients. It also is the first step in allowing us to make CDF the default format for all Wolfram products. And it gives some pretty good potential for DRM as well. We do believe we can develop a DRM platform on that. And then finally, sort of like what I just described as that portable CDF solution, we do aim to have a CDF archive format, which is essentially a zip file that is recognizable as a CDF. So your entire application can be built in multi-file layout that is then saved as a CDF, and you can deliver that to people, and it will open as a CDF in any Wolfram product, including the players. Then last point here, as far as resources go, we did develop a new training course that pulls together a lot of the information we've pulled together on our website, and then some in terms of developing CDFs, and particularly hairy advanced cases. Maybe some of you took that. We offered that just ahead of the conference, and we've got these website updates on our various links that point to resources and other things. So that's it for me.